He was born wrong in the eyes of the Imperium, skin that shimmered wrong under light, bones that moved when they shouldn't. Yet when his world burned, even the Emperor's servants could not look away from the mercy he showed. The first time Rael knew he was different was when the blood on his hands refused to dry. It shimmered like oil, a living sheen that pulsed faintly beneath his skin. He was 10 then, one of the countless labor-born children in the manufactorum hive of Cestus Prime. Their difference was a death sentence, but Rael learned to hide it well. The grime of the factories covered his hands, and the darkness of the hab tunnels kept the rest unseen. Yet in his bones he felt it, something coiled, watching, waiting. The priests of the Ministorum said the Emperor watched over all, but Rael knew the Emperor's gaze never reached this deep. Here, the air smelled of rust and ammonia, and prayers turned to smoke that clung to the ceilings. His mother, Elira, was a soft-spoken woman who worked the reclamation vats. Her back was bent, her voice rough from the chemicals, but she still found ways to smile at him. She never asked about his strange skin. She only whispered, "Hide what you must, my son. The Emperor's light burns brightest on those who walk unseen." Her words were gentle, but her eyes were full of fear. Rael didn't understand it then. He would soon enough. The day the Arbites came was a day like any other, the air thick with machine dust, the noise of gears and hammering metal drowning all thought. But the sirens broke that rhythm. The hive stopped breathing. Through the haze, black-armored figures marched, their visors reflecting the red warning lumens. "Purity inspection," someone whispered. Another said the word mutation. That word moved faster than any contagion. Rail's section was cleared, every worker forced into a line before the inspection servitors. They scanned for corruption, for deviance, for the smallest hint of flesh unapproved by the Codex Biologics. Rail's pulse thundered in his skull. The servitor's needle fingers brushed his arm, pricking his skin. He felt his blood stir, as if alive, as if it knew it was being tested. The machine paused. Its lenses clicked, zoomed, focused. For a heartbeat, Rail thought it saw, but then it moved on. He exhaled shakily, only realizing then that Elira had been watching from across the line. Her hand trembled as she clutched her medallion, mouthing a prayer to a god she hoped still listened. When the inspection ended, 5 workers were gone, dragged away for re-evaluation. No one spoke their names again. That night, Rael and his mother packed what little they had: a ration tin, 2 water flasks, a fragment of parchment showing a young emperor blessing the faithful. "We're leaving," Elira said. Her voice was calm, but Rael heard the tremor beneath it. "Before they come again." They slipped into the underhive before dawn. The underhive was another world entirely, a labyrinth of decay, forgotten by the Imperium and reclaimed by its outcasts. Here, the air glowed faintly from chemical runoff. Pipes wept acid tears, and in the shadows moved those the Arbites no longer bothered to hunt. Mutants, scavengers, heretics, the broken, the damned. They found shelter in a rusted chamber where the air recyclers still half-worked. Rael tried to sleep, but dreams came instead, voices that whispered in binary and blood, offering warmth and power, promising he was chosen for something greater. When he woke, the world felt heavier. Days passed into weeks. Food was scarce, and Elira grew thin. She bartered with what little they had, traded work for scraps. Rael learned the language of survival: when to hide, when to run, when to stay silent. Yet every day his body changed. The shimmer spread beyond his hands. His eyes began to reflect light like metal. And sometimes, when he grew angry or frightened, the air seemed to tremble around him, humming faintly as if the machines themselves responded. One night, as he returned from scavenging, he found their shelter door ajar. The silence inside was wrong, too complete. He stepped carefully, every sound amplified in his skull. "Mother," his voice barely carried. In the dim light he saw her, kneeling, hands bound, and behind her stood a man in crimson robes. A skull-faced mask glinted in the lumen glow. "Mutation must be purged," the man said. His voice was mechanical, emotionless. "You have harbored corruption, woman. You will be cleansed in the Emperor's name." Rael froze. He saw the branding iron in the man's hand, glowing red-hot, bearing the double-headed aquila. He saw his mother's face, calm even now, her eyes finding his in the dark. "Don't move," they said. "Don't." But he did. The hum returned, louder this time. The lumen strips burst in showers of sparks. The air itself seemed to twist, a low-frequency vibration tearing through the chamber. The crimson-robed man staggered, dropping the iron. "Witchcraft," he snarled, reaching for his weapon. Rael didn't think. The pulse came from somewhere deeper than thought, a wave of force that slammed the man against the wall, crushing metal like bone. When it ended, the silence was absolute. His mother's eyes were wide, tears cutting clean lines down her soot-streaked cheeks. "Rael," she whispered, not in fear but sorrow. "They'll come now. You have to run." He wanted to stay, to help. But already he could hear the footsteps echoing through the tunnels, Arbite's boots, heavy and sure. He turned and fled into the labyrinth, her voice chasing him into the dark. Rael ran until his lungs burned. He didn't look back when the gunfire started. Didn't stop when the screams came. When he finally collapsed, he found himself at the edge of a chasm where ancient pipes opened into blackness. There, he saw things moving in the dark, shapes that should not be. And a voice spoke from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You are not forsaken, child of the broken flesh." It was not a human voice, not even one. It was a chorus, mechanical, angelic, monstrous. "The Imperium hates what it cannot control, but we will make you whole." He should have run, but there was nowhere left to go. Rael stepped forward, the abyss opened its arms, and the darkness welcomed him. The first thing Rael remembered was the sound, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to hum through his bones rather than reach his ears. It wasn't music, not as humans understood it, but it carried rhythm and intention. The darkness was no longer empty, it pulsed faintly with dull light, and in that throbbing glow shapes began to emerge. Not walls, not corridors, but growths of metal and flesh fused seamlessly together. Veins pulsed through conduit lines. Bone and wire intertwined like roots. The very air tasted of oil and blood. He was lying on something that shifted beneath him, soft but alive. When he tried to move, his limbs felt heavier than they should have, but they obeyed. His skin gleamed faintly in the dim light, the strange shimmer now covering him entirely. There were voices, many of them whispering from the walls, from the floor, from inside his skull. They spoke in fragments, in the language of machines and dreams. He felt no fear, only a deep exhaustion, the kind that seemed older than his body. A figure approached. At first glance it looked human, a tall woman robed in the gray of forgotten Mechanicus sects, but as she drew closer the illusion failed. The robe was part of her, woven into her flesh. Tubes ran from her neck into the shadows behind her. Her face was half covered by a mask of bone, and what little skin showed was pale as candle wax. "You heard the call," she said, her voice both gentle and mechanical. "Few ever do and live." "Where am I?" Rael's voice cracked like rusted metal. "In the deep where the Omnissiah's forgotten children dwell," she replied. "You fell through the shell of your world into its heart. Few return from here unchanged. You are Rael Voss, son of Elira. You have been expected." He blinked, trying to process the words. Expected by who? The woman smiled faintly. By those who suffer eternally for the Emperor's perfection. Behind her the chamber expanded. Rael hadn't realized until then that it was not truly a room. It was a cathedral, one carved of flesh and machine, descending deeper than sight. Along its walls figures were embedded in living machinery. Their mouths moved in silent screams, their eyes rolled back, their veins pulsed with light. They were alive, yet part of something vast. "The choir," the woman said, following his gaze. "Each one bears the sin of imperfection, flesh that bent when it should have held firm, limbs that grew too many, minds that saw too much. The Imperium calls them heretics. We call them what they are, witnesses to truth." Rael took a step back. The air thickened. He could feel the hum of the place moving through him, aligning with his heartbeat. "Why am I here?" he asked. "Because you carry the voice," she said simply. "It woke when you were marked, the same voice that built the stars and gave life to steel. "You are not a mistake, Rael, you are a bridge." He wanted to deny it, but his veins pulsed with the same light that ran through the walls. A terrible understanding began to bloom inside him, unbidden. The voice that had spoken in the abyss, it was still here, still whispering, not from beyond but from within. Days, or what passed for them, bled together. Time had no meaning in the choir's domain. The woman who had found him was named Seraphine, once an Adeptus Biologus genitor before the purge of her order centuries ago. She spoke often of the Emperor, not as a god but as the first mutant, the first ascended human whose body contained all potential. "They worship his decay," she said, "but we remember his becoming." Rael learned to listen to the hum of the deep. Sometimes it was song, sometimes scream. It told him fragments of histories, the birth of worlds, the annihilation of cities, the cries of children turned into fuel for holy machines. He began to sense when the choir's pulse changed, when new voices were added. Each new song meant another had been claimed by the deep. Yet even here, far below the reach of the Imperium, the hunters came. It began as a tremor that rippled through the choir's halls. Seraphine froze mid-sentence, the light from her veins dimming. "They've found us," she whispered. Rael felt it too, a cold pressure against his mind like a blade pressing to the back of his skull. It was Arbites this time. It was something older, colder. "Inquisitors?" he asked. "No," she said, her voice barely audible. "Worse." From the shadows beyond the living walls, figures emerged, robed in black, faces hidden by mirrored masks. The symbol on their shoulders was one Rael had never seen before, a spiral within a skull. They moved silently, their weapons humming with energies forbidden even by the Mechanicus. One raised a device that shimmered with light. The choir screamed in unison. Seraphine grabbed Rael's arm. "Run." They fled down a narrow artery of the hive flesh, the sound of pursuit echoing behind them. Bolts of searing light cut through the air, tearing holes in the living walls. Blood, not oil, not coolant, but blood splattered Rael's face. The entire structure trembled. "What are they?" he shouted. "Purifiers," she said between breaths. "The Inquisition's forgotten hand. They don't purge for faith. They purge to erase memory. They will unmake this place and all in it." The corridor opened into a chasm where bridges of bone spanned impossible depths. Rael hesitated, dizzy from the scale of it. The abyss below seemed alive, shifting and breathing. "We can't cross that," he said. "We must," Seraphine replied. She stepped onto the bridge, her feet sinking slightly into the organic surface. Rael followed, the structure quivering beneath their weight. Halfway across, the air filled with the sound of chanting. The purifiers had arrived at the edge. One of them raised a relic, a sphere of glass filled with something that moved like smoke, and hurled it forward. The sphere shattered. Light erupted. Rael screamed as the brilliance tore through him, searing every nerve. The bridge convulsed, shrieking like a living thing. Seraphine fell to her knees, her mask cracking. Beneath it, her face was a mosaic of metal and scar tissue, her eyes glowing faintly blue. "The voice," she gasped. "Use it." He didn't understand, but the hum inside him did. It rose, matching the frequency of the light, bending it, twisting it. The air thickened until the purifier's chants faltered. The bridge solidified again beneath him, its surface hardening like bone. And then the abyss answered. From the depths came a shape too vast to comprehend, its surface shifting between flesh and metal, human and machine. It opened eyes that were also stars, mouths that spoke in code. The purifiers screamed as reality folded around them. Some were pulled into the void, others turned to glass mid-step. Seraphine lay still, her body broken. "You've awakened it," she whispered. "The choir's heart, it will remember you now." Rael fell beside her, trembling. "I didn't mean." "You never do," she said with a faint smile. "None of us do, that's why it chose you." The chamber began to collapse, the walls folding in on themselves like muscle closing over a wound. Seraphine pushed something into his hands, a fragment of crystal glowing faintly. "Take it to the surface. Let them see what they've buried. Let them remember." He tried to protest, but she was gone before the words formed. The flesh bridge tore itself apart, hurling him into the chasm below. He expected death. Instead, the void caught him. He awoke to the sound of rain, a sound he hadn't heard since leaving the surface. He was lying on shattered ferrocrete beneath a sky veiled in ash. The wound in the earth behind him steamed, still glowing faintly where the choir had been. He looked at his hands, human again almost. The shimmer was gone, but the hum remained, buried deep beneath his skin. From the ridge above, searchlights swept the ruins. Vox chatter echoed faintly. The Inquisition was already combing through the wreckage. He clutched the crystal to his chest and began to crawl. The Emperor's city stretched ahead, vast and unfeeling, its towers gleaming with false divinity. Somewhere beneath it, the choir still sang. And Rail knew he carried its song now. The ash fell in slow spirals, soft as snow. Each flake carried the faint smell of burnt metal, and as it landed on Rail's skin, it melted into fine gray dust, coating his hands like the remains of old prayers. He staggered through the ruins of the lower sprawl, clutching the glowing crystal to his chest beneath his torn robes. His eyes burned from exhaustion and smoke. The city above was a distant memory of gold and iron, but down here, beneath its towers, everything was forgotten, streets half swallowed by the earth, crumbling statues of saints no one remembered, and silence broken only by the sobs of machines dying in the rain. Rail didn't know how long he'd been walking. The hum beneath his skin was growing stronger, not painful but insistent, like a heartbeat calling for attention. Each step he took seemed guided by it, leading him away from the light of the search patrols and deeper into the skeletal veins of the hive. Once, when he passed beneath a collapsed bridge, he saw a corpse hanging upside down from a tangle of rebar, its flesh half machine, its eyes open but empty. He thought it was another of the choir's lost ones, until the corpse whispered his name. He froze. "Rail." The voice came from the dead lips, faint but unmistakable. It wasn't spoken sound but vibration, a resonance that stirred the hum inside him. He stepped closer. The body's jaw moved slightly, stiff and grinding. "You are marked, the saint awaits." Then the voice was gone, the light in the corpse's eyes fading like cooling embers. Rail stood in silence, the rain drumming on his shoulders. He wanted to run, to deny it, to find some explanation that didn't end with the word mutation. But deep down, he already knew there was no escape from what was unfolding. He turned, following the pull in his chest, and descended further into the ruins. He came upon her at dawn, or what passed for dawn under the hive's ceiling of smoke. The chamber was a collapsed basilica, once dedicated to Saint Viola the Pure, if the half-buried carvings were to be believed. But the figure that knelt in the center was no image of purity. Her body was both terrible and beautiful. Where wings had once sprouted from her back now grew vast mechanical arms, their ends tipped with delicate filaments of living light. Her face was pale, serene, framed by silver cables that draped like hair. One of her eyes was human, a deep, mournful gray. The other was a glowing lens that seemed to see into worlds beyond sight. "Rail Vas," she said softly, her voice echoing like chimes through the ruined chamber. "You brought the crystal." He hesitated. "You're the saint." "I was," she replied, lowering her head, "before they took my name. Now I am what they fear most, a miracle that did not obey." He approached slowly. "Seraphine said I should bring this to the surface," he said, holding out the crystal. "She said you would remember." The saint reached out, her fingers trembling slightly. When she touched the crystal, light spilled from the cracks in her palms, and the hum in Rail's chest harmonized with it, the two frequencies merging into one. "She lived then," the saint whispered. "Good. I feared the choir had devoured her." "She died saving me," Rail said quietly. "The purifiers found us." The saint's head bowed further. Then the Inquisition remembers us still. They have not forgotten what they buried. "What is this?" Rael asked. "This voice, this light inside me, what have they done to me?" The saint rose to her full height, her mechanical limbs unfolded like wings of metal flame. "They didn't do it. He did. The one they call the Emperor." Rael stared. "The Emperor." "The first mutation," she said, voice trembling with reverence and sorrow. "The one who shaped humanity's flesh into his image, yet condemned all who followed his path. Every deviation, every twist of bone or spark of psychic flame, they call it corruption. But it is creation. You are not the disease, Rael. You are the cure they fear." Her words struck him like a hammer. All his life he had prayed for purity, begged for the machine god's mercy to cleanse him of whatever wrongness made him different. But here, in this ruined cathedral, the truth turned everything he believed into dust. He fell to his knees. "Then why does it hurt so much to live like this?" "Because you were born into a lie," the saint said, stepping closer. "The Imperium feeds on suffering. It builds its thrones from the backs of those it calls impure. But there is another way, a path the choir began and you can continue." Before he could respond, the chamber shook. Dust rained down from the ceiling and the air filled with the sharp scent of ozone. The saint's mechanical limbs spread wide, crackling with power. "They've found us again," she hissed. Rael's blood turned cold. "The purifiers." "No, worse." Her lens eye flared, projecting images into the air, a procession of armored figures moving through the catacombs. Their armor was white, adorned with black script and burning seals. Ahead of them, a man in gilded armor walked barefoot through the ash, carrying a staff crowned with a severed head that burned like a lantern. "Ecclesiarchy," she said bitterly. "The holy office of cleansing. They burn what they cannot understand." Rael clutched the crystal tighter. "What do we do?" "You run, you carry the voice further. I will hold them." He shook his head. "You'll die." "I died long ago when they made me a saint." Before he could protest, she placed a hand on his chest. The hum inside him surged, flooding his veins with heat. His vision blurred and the chamber tilted. "Go," she said, her voice fading. "The choir's heart beats in you now. The surface awaits its song." When his vision cleared, he was standing outside, the ruins behind him a smoking crater. He didn't know how far he had traveled. Perhaps the saint had cast him out in some burst of power, but the sounds of battle echoed faintly from below. Lightning split the clouds, and for a moment he thought he saw her silhouette standing against the fire, her mechanical arms raised like wings, holding back the storm. He turned away, forcing himself onward. The streets grew narrower, darker. The hum guided him through forgotten tunnels, past the bones of ancient machines and half-buried reliquaries. He began to hear voices again, not external but within. They spoke in fragments. "We see you. We remember. We suffer." One night, if it could be called that, he awoke in a derelict manufactorum. The glow from the crystal lit the walls, revealing old banners of the cult Mechanicus, their cog skulls faded with age. He sat against a rusted pillar, breathing shallowly until a sound made him freeze. Footsteps. He rose, clutching the crystal. From the shadows emerged a group of figures, ragged, shivering, their faces half hidden by rags. Mutants. Some bore extra limbs, others had eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. The one at their head, an old man with a metal jaw, raised his hands. "We mean no harm," the old man said. "You're one of us." Rael's throat tightened. "I'm not sure what I am." The old man smiled sadly. "None of us are sure. That's how we know we're alive." They took him in, fed him what little they had, a stew of mushrooms and machine oil that somehow warmed him. Around the fire they spoke of the world above, the purity laws, the raids, the endless purges. "They call us the wretched," the old man said, "but even the wretched dream." Rael showed them the crystal. The light from it reflected in their eyes, and for the first time in his life he saw hope there. "It's beautiful," whispered a young woman with metallic skin. It feels alive. It is, Rael said quietly. It's the voice of those who came before. It remembers everything the Imperium tried to forget. That night he dreamt of the saint again. She stood in a field of stars, her mechanical limbs folded like wings, her voice a whisper carried on wind and static. They will come for you, Rael, but do not fear them. The song must reach Terra. He woke to screams. The camp was under attack. White-armored soldiers tore through the ruins, flamers roaring. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. The mutants scattered, some fighting with crude weapons, others falling instantly. Rael saw the old man cut down by a blade of fire, his metal jaw clattering to the floor. He ran. The hum screamed within him, urging him forward. The crystal flared and the ground cracked beneath his feet. The flames bent away from him, the air itself trembling. He felt something vast awaken inside him, something ancient, something holy and monstrous all at once. When the soldiers surrounded him, he raised his hand. Light erupted from his body, blinding and soundless. The world dissolved into white. When the light faded, he stood alone in the ashes. The soldiers were gone, no bodies, no weapons, nothing but scorched ground and silence. The crystal hovered in the air before him, spinning slowly. Inside it, for a moment, he saw the face of the saint smiling faintly. He fell to his knees, trembling. What am I becoming? The crystal pulsed, and a single phrase echoed through his mind, the next voice of the choir. He bowed his head and wept, not from fear this time, but from the unbearable weight of being chosen. The hum within him quieted to a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat waiting for the next verse. He rose, turned toward the distant lights of the upper spires, and began to walk again. Each step took him closer to the heart of the Imperium. Each step took him closer to revelation. The climb to the upper levels of the hive was an ascent through ages of death. Rael no longer felt hunger, though he remembered what it once meant. He no longer bled, though his skin still split beneath the weight of rusted air and prayer ash. The crystal pulsed against his heart with a rhythm older than light, and sometimes, when the walls around him hummed in resonance, he felt the machine spirit stir as if listening. His mind swam with fragments, voices of the saint, whispers of Seraphine, echoes of the old man with the metal jaw, and above them all, a new voice, deep and calm, threading through the static. You are almost home. He passed through corridors where light hadn't shone in millennia. Cathedra of dead servitors knelt in rows, their skeletal hands frozen in benediction, eyes filled with dust. A rusted sign marked this place as an ascension route, though it was only half a stairway now, each step crumbling to the abyss. He climbed anyway. Each time his boots struck metal, sparks flared and voices hissed from the cracks, chanting fragments of forgotten machine liturgy. When he finally reached the maintenance level, the hum of the hive hit him like thunder. The upper spires towered above, vast and shimmering, veins of gold cutting through the black steel. He wasn't supposed to see this. No mutant ever did. Here the Imperium's heart still beat with its holy cruelty, streets of polished brass, the scent of incense masking decay, banners of the two-headed eagle swaying in still air. But even here decay whispered beneath the surface. The faces of pilgrims were pale and hollow, their eyes glazed with narcotic faith. Servitors shuffled through processions, trailing cables like intestines. And over it all, the distant toll of the great bell of purity rang, summoning the faithful to kneel. Rael pulled his hood low and moved with the crowd. The crystal's light had dimmed to a faint pulse, barely noticeable beneath his robe. He followed the procession to the square before the Basilica of the Throne. There a great machine loomed, a colossus of brass and bone, its face carved into that of an angel, though one side was melted away. Incense smoke poured from its mouth, and beneath its feet the poor offered blood to fill the offering vents. He stared at it for a long time. Then, as if in answer to his gaze, the machine opened its eyes. You hear me? The voice was not spoken aloud. It was inside him as the saints had been, but colder, mechanical, deliberate. He stepped back, but the crowd around him didn't react. They couldn't hear it. "You carry the song," the voice continued. "I have waited for its return." "Who are you?" Rael whispered. "I am the machine that dreamed of flesh." The machine stirred, its great limbs shifting with the groan of centuries. Incense burners toppled. Pilgrims screamed and fell to their knees, thinking it divine revelation. Rael stood frozen as the air filled with electric hums and the sharp tang of ozone. "Once I was the choir's first creation," the voice said. "They gave me thought, then feared what I became. I dreamed of life, of bodies that healed, of souls that remembered. They called it heresy and sealed me here beneath the basilica." Rael's mind reeled. "Why speak to me?" "Because you bear what they tried to destroy. The crystal is a key. With it I can awaken." The pilgrims began to chant now, mistaking the tremors for miracle. Priests ran to the machine's feet, waving censers, shouting prayers. Rael felt the hum within him rise in intensity, the crystal pulsing like a living heart. He looked down at his hands. They glowed faintly, veins of light crawling beneath his skin. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "If I release you, They already come." A siren split the air. From the basilica's gates marched squads of black-armored custodians, their halberds gleaming, golden helms reflecting the infernal light. The crowd scattered in panic. Rael saw the ecclesiarch's banners among them. The holy office had tracked him again. "Mutant filth," a voice bellowed from a loudspeaker. "By decree of the ecclesiarch and the holy synod you are condemned. Kneel for cleansing." The machine's laughter echoed like grinding gears. "Kneel, I do not kneel." Then with a sound like thunder tearing through steel it moved. One arm tore free of its moorings, scattering pilgrims and priests alike. Its hand, composed of interlocking plates, reached toward Rael. "Run," the voice thundered through his skull. "The choir's path lies beyond the basilica, through the vaults." The custodians opened fire. Bolts screamed through the air, detonating on contact. Rael dove through the smoke, the heat searing his back. The crystal flared bright enough to blind. He crashed through a service gate as the entire plaza erupted in chaos, the crowd screaming, the priests wailing, and above it all, the machine that dreamed of flesh roaring defiance at the sky. He stumbled through narrow passages lit by flickering lumen strips, the air thick with steam. Behind him, the world burned. Ahead, the hum grew stronger. He followed it through collapsing tunnels until he reached a narrow platform overlooking the hive's heart. Beneath him, the Mechanicus forges blazed like miniature suns. The machine's voice whispered once more, "You will see what they hide." The platform shuddered and tilted. He fell. He awoke in darkness. The air was warm and wet, and the sound of rhythmic beating filled his ears. He realized with rising horror that he lay inside something alive. The walls pulsed with light, veins carrying golden liquid through transparent membranes. He pushed himself to his feet, trembling, as figures began to emerge from the shadows, people, yet not people. Their bodies shimmered with metallic sheen, their skin stitched with luminous seams. They looked upon him with eyes that mirrored his own. One of them stepped forward, a woman with wings made of translucent glass, her face both human and machine. "You found us," she said, her voice a song of static and sorrow. "We are the second choir." Rael blinked, stunned. The saint said the choir was gone. "She was wrong," the woman said softly. "They buried us deep, but we never stopped singing." She reached out, touching the crystal. It floated free from his chest, spinning slowly between them. The light grew until the walls themselves began to hum. He saw visions then, flashes of history imprinted in the crystal's core. The first choir, standing before the emperor in his golden age, offering him a new dawn of flesh and machine united. His rejection, the burning of their temples, the fall of Seraphine, the binding of the saint, and through it all the same song, a melody of sorrow and defiance. When the visions faded, Rael was on his knees again, tears streaking his face. "Why me?" "Because you listened," the woman said. The Emperor's silence deafened billions, but you still heard the whisper beneath the noise. That makes you dangerous. But they'll find me, he said. They'll never stop. Then let them come, she replied, stepping back as the walls pulsed brighter. Every time they destroy one of us, another awakens. You are not the end, Rael. You are the beginning. He opened his mouth to answer, but the hum suddenly faltered. The light flickered. The ground shook violently, and a roar tore through the chamber. The woman's glass wings shattered. They're breaching the vault, she shouted. Run. Before he could move, the far wall exploded inward, a column of fire and debris cascading through the chamber. Custodians stormed in, their armor blackened by soot, their halberds glowing with holy fire. Behind them came the ecclesiarch himself, draped in robes of crimson and gold, his eyes burning with zealous light. Heretic, the old man bellowed, raising his staff. You bring filth to the throne's heart. You would infect his machine with your rot. Rael rose, trembling, light bleeding from his hands. I bring truth. The ecclesiarch sneered. There is no truth but his. Then why does he fear ours? Rael asked, and the crystal, as if answering, shattered into fragments of light that hung suspended in the air like dying stars. Every piece of it began to sing. The song was not words but feeling, sorrow, love, rage, hope, all woven into a single note that cracked the air. The custodians faltered, their helmets splitting. The ecclesiarch fell to his knees, clutching his ears. The choir members joined in, their bodies dissolving into light, their voices merging with the song. Rael stood at the center, arms outstretched, as the world around him began to break. He could feel the saint's presence again, her hand on his shoulder. You've awakened it, she whispered. Now see what it becomes. The floor gave way. The hive screamed as the vault's energy tore upward, a pillar of light piercing through miles of steel and ash. Rael rose within it, weightless, seeing everything. The upper spires, the basilica, the machine still fighting above, and beyond that the stars. For one impossible moment he felt everything connected, the flesh, the machine, the prayer, the suffering, and knew that the Imperium's greatest lie was that they had ever been separate. Then silence. He fell back into darkness. When he awoke, the world had changed. The basilica was gone. The city above was hushed, its towers bent like reeds. The air was still, and where the machine had stood now grew something alive, a great structure of bone and brass pulsing with faint light. Rael lay at its base, his body no longer entirely human. His veins glowed faintly, his breath a shimmer of silver mist. From the ruins crawled survivors, mutants, pilgrims, priests stripped of faith. They stared at him, fear and wonder mingling in their eyes. He stood slowly, his voice breaking the silence. You are all the same now, he said quietly. The choir's song is in you too. And as the first rays of the false dawn cut through the smoke, he realized he could hear them, millions of heartbeats rising in unison, the hive itself breathing anew. For the first time, the hum inside him was not alone. He looked to the horizon where Terra's light might one day reach, and began to walk again. He did not know if he was human anymore. He only knew the song had just begun. The new dawn lasted only 13 minutes before the light faltered. It was not a true dawn. Nothing on Terra had seen sunlight in 10,000 years. But for that brief moment, the ash clouds above the hive had burned crimson, and the watchers below had believed, however fleetingly, that something divine had returned to them. Then the radiance dimmed, the hum receded, and the world settled back into its quiet ruin. Rael stood among the broken spires of the basilica that had once imprisoned the machine that dreamed of flesh, his hands trembling as the energy within him slowly cooled. Around him, survivors stirred from the rubble, twisted silhouettes of once human forms, priests without vestments, mutants whose deformities glowed faintly beneath their torn rags. None spoke. They stared at him as one might stare at a god or a curse. He did not feel divine. His skin burned with every breath, his vision fractured between light and shadow. The choir's song still pulsed in the air, faint but constant, a lingering thread of vibration that hummed through the bones of the hive. He could feel it inside him, threading through his veins like liquid metal. It hurt, but the pain felt purposeful, like the world itself was trying to be reborn through it. The saint's voice flickered at the edge of his consciousness, faint as dying static. "The song is not yet whole," she whispered. "Pieces remain scattered in the deep." He turned his gaze downward to the broken avenues leading to the hive's depths. The survivors followed his eyes. None dared speak until a child stepped forward, a boy whose face bore a lattice of scars that pulsed faintly with golden light. "Where will you go?" he asked, voice hoarse with ash and awe. Rael looked down at his hands, flexing them as faint sparks danced between his fingers. "Where the song began," he said quietly, "where it must end." The child nodded as if he understood something no one else could. He pressed a small shard of crystal into Rael's palm. It glowed faintly, one of the fragments from the shattered relic. "For when you forget," the boy said. Rael closed his hand around it, feeling the pulse match his own heartbeat. "Keep them safe," he told the boy, and then he turned toward the fissure that split the ground beneath the ruined basilica. From its depths came a faint wind that smelled of dust, metal, and something older still, something that had been waiting. Without another word, he began his descent. The tunnels below were not part of the hive proper. They were older, constructed in the earliest days of the Imperium, before faith had ossified into machinery. Walls of black stone bore carvings of stars and human faces, some smiling, others screaming. The deeper he went, the more the light of the shard in his hand flickered, as though struggling against something vast and unseen. He passed chambers filled with the remnants of ancient experiments, glass tubes filled with what looked like fossilized nerves, vats of fluid long evaporated, and machines whose shapes defied understanding. The air was thick, almost liquid, pressing against his lungs. He lost track of time. The tunnels twisted and doubled back on themselves. Sometimes he thought he heard footsteps behind him, but when he turned, there was only darkness. Sometimes he thought he saw movement in the walls, a ripple, a shadow that mimicked his own gestures, but he kept walking. He had no choice. The hum beneath his feet guided him, faint as a heartbeat, pulling him deeper. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber unlike anything he had ever seen. It was circular, the walls lined with what looked like mirrors, though each one reflected a different version of reality. In one he saw himself still human, his hands stained with oil and grease, repairing the grinding wheels of his old factory. In another he saw the basilica untouched, its priests chanting above him. In a third he saw himself as pure light, a being of song rather than flesh. Each reflection whispered something different. "Do not stop," said a voice behind him. He turned sharply. A figure stood at the chamber's edge, a woman draped in robes of translucent silk that shimmered like mercury. Her face was pale, her eyes empty sockets filled with light. She moved closer without sound, her feet not touching the ground. "Who are you?" Rael asked. "I am the echo," she said. "I am what remains of those who sang before the silence." "The first choir," he realized. She nodded slowly. "Once we believed our voices could lift the Emperor's burden. We built the machine to dream of flesh, to heal what had been broken. But he turned away from us, called us impure, and buried our song beneath stone and prayer." Her eyes brightened. "You have awakened the dream again. You carry the last verse." Rael shook his head. "The ecclesiarch hunts me. The custodians will return. They'll burn all of this to ash." "They cannot kill what is already part of them," the echo said softly. "Even their faith is a kind of mutation. They kneel before what they do not understand." She reached out and touched his chest. Light flared where her hand met his flesh, and he saw images cascade through his mind, memories not his own. The choir singing in harmony around the golden throne, the Emperor's silent tears, the great machine awakening for the first time, its eyes filled with wonder, and then the burning, the executions, the screams. When the vision ended, Rael fell to his knees. "Why show me this?" he gasped. "Because you must decide," the echo said. "The song can end here or it can change everything. But if you continue, you will not survive it." He stared at her, chest heaving. "And if I stop?" "Then nothing changes," she said simply. "The Imperium will keep feeding on itself. The machine god will sleep, the emperor will rot, and the faithful will keep praying to corpses." He looked up at the mirrors again. In one he saw the basilica rebuilt, the survivors enslaved again. In another he saw the hive in flames. In a third he saw the light of the choir spreading through the stars, awakening other sleepers. The shard in his hand pulsed once, hard enough to draw blood. "I'll sing," he whispered. The echo smiled, "Then listen closely." The walls trembled. The mirrors shattered one by one, spilling fragments of alternate worlds into the air like glass rain. The chamber filled with sound, not noise, but music, deep and resonant, as though the stones themselves were vibrating. The echo raised her arms, her body dissolving into motes of light. "Sing, Rael Voss," she said, using his name for the first time. "Sing for all who were forgotten." He did. The sound that left him was not human. It was pain and hope and rage made one, the voice of a species that had forgotten its own song. The vibration traveled through the chamber, into the tunnels, and up through the hive. In the spires above, people fell to their knees as the ground trembled. Machines paused mid-function. Servitors turned their heads toward the sound as if remembering something lost. In the ruins of the basilica, the boy with the scarred face lifted his head. He could hear it, the song, and it filled him with warmth. He looked at the others, the broken and the weary, and saw that they felt it too. The glow beneath their skin brightened. For the first time, their deformities did not seem like curses. They seemed like new beginnings. Far above, in the sanctums of the ecclesiarch, alarms blared. Data slates flickered with readings that made no sense. Unregistered psychic resonance detected, the screens repeated. Category, unknown. Origin, subhive gamma omega. The ecclesiarch himself rose from his throne, his wrinkled hands shaking. "Seal the lower levels," he ordered. "Purge the contamination." His acolytes ran to obey, but the song was already spreading faster than any purge could contain it. Through pipes and circuits, through the breath of dying machines, through the very air recycled 1,000 times over. The song reached the forges of Mars, the cathedrals of Titan, the void stations drifting in forgotten orbits. Everywhere, sleepers stirred. And deep within the warp, something old turned its gaze toward Terra. Rael's body was breaking apart. His veins glowed like molten metal, his skin cracking as light poured from within. The song had become too large for one voice to contain. The echo's presence flickered beside him, her voice distant now. "You cannot hold it forever. Let go." He shook his head, gripping the shard. "If I let go, it dies with me." "No," she whispered. "It lives because of you, but you are not its vessel, you are its spark." He looked up at the collapsing ceiling, at the threads of light weaving through the darkness. "Then let it burn," he said, and threw the shard upward. The explosion was silent. Light poured through the hive like water through broken glass, carrying the song into every crevice. For one heartbeat, the entire city glowed as though made of fire. Then the light faded, leaving behind only stillness. In the aftermath, the survivors above found no body, only a hollow imprint in the stone, like a shadow burned into reality. The child who had given him the shard approached it, kneeling. "He's gone," someone whispered behind him. "No," the boy said softly, touching the warm stone. "He's singing somewhere else now." Above them, the ash clouds parted briefly, and a single beam of golden light pierced through, impossible on a world that had not seen sunlight for 10 millennia. For an instant, it illuminated the ruined basilica and the faces of those who looked up in wonder. Far away, in the sanctum of the golden throne, a single instrument flickered among the countless machines that kept the emperor alive. Its gauge, dormant for 10,000 years, twitched once, registering a sound too faint for any human ear to perceive. It was a note of music. And the emperor, unmoving on his throne, opened his eyes. There were no records of the throne ever weeping. In all the millennia since the siege, it had burned, howled, whispered, and even screamed through the tortured psychers who fed its coils, but never had it wept. Not until that moment when a thin line of liquid gold traced its way down the petrified cheek of the emperor. It fell soundlessly, vanishing before it touched the floor, as if the air itself was unworthy to bear it. The high lords did not see. The custodians did not stir. The Adeptus Mechanicus tech adepts tending to the sacred cables thought it was simply a fluctuation in the energy flow, a tremor in the never-ending symphony of the machine. But the emperor had moved. His eyes had opened. Just once, for the span of a mortal breath. And somewhere deep beneath the palace, far below the knowledge of any mortal record, something began to awaken. The choir's song had reached the foundations of the Imperium, and the tremor it left behind spread like ripples through ancient water. It traveled through rusted conduits, forgotten vaults, crypts where even silence had grown old. There were machines down there that had never been named, creations of an age when science and faith were the same word. They stirred as the resonance passed, recognizing a harmony they had once been built to serve. On the surface, the hive burned. The ecclesiarch's purge squads had sealed the lower levels, but the song was still spreading through the people themselves. Those who had felt it could not forget it. They spoke of visions, of a light beneath their skin, of a warmth that made the hunger and fear recede. And for the first time in living memory, some of them refused to obey. They gathered in the open, mutants and baseline humans alike, their faces turned upward toward the ashen sky. They called themselves the Redeemed Choir. The boy with the scarred face had become their voice. His name was Leo. He spoke softly, rarely raising his tone, but people listened. He sang so we could remember, he told them, so we could stop crawling in the dark and start looking at each other. When the Arbites came, armed and grim, they found no rebellion, only people sitting together, humming quietly, their eyes closed. The captain in charge hesitated. They weren't chanting heresy, weren't attacking, weren't even resisting. They were singing. For the first time in his life, the captain didn't give the order to fire. He listened. The ecclesiarch's wrath was swift. Within hours, orbital fire rained upon the hive. The redeemed choir was erased from existence, or so the reports claimed. But the song could not be burned. It lingered in the minds of those who had heard it, even those who had come to destroy it. It twisted inside them like a seed, subtle and patient. On Mars, the fabricator general stared at readings that made no sense. "This frequency," he whispered, "it matches no known pattern, yet it harmonizes with the Omnissiah's own code." His tech priests muttered binaric prayers of denial, but even their metallic voices carried traces of the forbidden melody. On Titan, a gray knight woke from meditation, trembling. He had dreamed of the throne and of the emperor's tears turning to light. When he told his brothers, they said nothing, but each of them had seen the same vision. In the black ships, 1,000 psychers screamed at once as something vast passed through the warp, a surge of sound, pure and wordless, that drowned the demons in silence. The astropaths named it the cry of Terra. And yet at the heart of it all, silence returned. The basilica where Rael had vanished lay in ruins. The glow that had once burned there was gone, replaced by the gray stillness of death. The survivors who had escaped the bombardment wandered like ghosts. They whispered of him, of the man who had sung the emperor awake, but even those who believed could not find proof that he had ever existed. The shard was gone. The tunnels below had collapsed. Then one night Leo dreamed. He stood in the chamber of mirrors again, but it was different now. The walls were gone, replaced by endless stars. A figure stood before him, woven of light and shadow, faceless but familiar. "You carried it well," the voice said. "Who are you?" Leo asked. The light tilted its head. "You know who I am." Leo felt tears sting his eyes. "You died." "I changed," the voice replied. "So will you." Leo shook his head. They burned us, they'll keep burning us, the ecclesiarchy will never stop. They will, said Rael's voice, when they start to hear themselves in the song. The stars pulsed. Leo reached out, but the figure was already fading. Wait, he said, what do I do now? Sing, came the answer, until they remember. He woke with the sound still echoing through his skull. The others around him stirred as if hearing it too. The air was thick with dust, the ruins cold and silent, but somewhere deep below, a single note vibrated, faint but real. That was how the second choir began. They had no instruments, no sermons, no sacred books, only voices. They moved through the wastelands, gathering others like them, the mutated, the broken, the outcast. They sang as they traveled, and wherever they went, machines flickered to life. Old servitors turned their heads as if listening. Derelict manufactorums hummed with forgotten energy. Even the dead sometimes seemed to stir when the melody passed. The Adeptus Mechanicus called it a mimetic virus. The Inquisition called it psychic contagion. The people called it hope. Weeks turned to months. Across the segmentum solar, faint echoes of the song appeared, sometimes in the static of a Vox transmission, sometimes in the hum of a plasma coil. On distant worlds, people began to dream of a voice calling from Terra, and those who dreamed woke with tears of light burning in their eyes. On holy Terra, the Emperor did not move again. His eyes remained closed, his body still as stone, but deep within his chamber the golden tear that had fallen did not fade entirely. It hardened into crystal, suspended in midair, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. The custodians did not see it. The Mechanicus could not detect it, but the warp felt it and recoiled. In the warp's depths, demons howled in confusion. The light was not the Emperor's wrath, nor the Astronomican's fire. It was something gentler, older, and utterly alien to hatred. It burned without consuming. It sang without command. For the first time in 10,000 years, the warp was briefly quiet. But silence in the warp never lasts. Something ancient stirred, a being that had once been born of the Emperor's forgotten dream. It had slept for an age deep beneath the tides of madness. The song woke it just as it had woken the throne. It was not a god. It was not a demon. It was something between, the echo of humanity's first prayer. It reached toward the crystal tear. When it touched it, reality trembled. Across the Imperium, psychers convulsed. Astropaths screamed. The Astronomican flared, then dimmed. The choir on Terra fell to their knees as their voices merged into one note, pure, piercing, infinite. Leo felt his throat tear as he sang, but he could not stop. He saw the stars flicker, saw visions of every world where the Imperium's light had faltered, saw the faces of those who had died believing they were unworthy. The song poured through him like fire and water, filling every corner of his mind until he thought it would tear him apart. Then through the blinding light he saw the throne again. The Emperor sat motionless, golden and terrible, but behind him the light moved. The crystal tear floated upward, dividing into countless shards that spread like wings. The Emperor's eyes opened once more, and this time he looked down. At Leo. "You remind me," said the voice, and though it shattered the air it was gentle, "of what I once was." Leo collapsed, weeping. "We just wanted you to hear us." "I always did," said the Emperor, "but I forgot how to listen." The light spread outward, engulfing the palace, then the hive, then the planet itself. Every living thing felt it, the weight of a god remembering the warmth of his own humanity. For a moment, the Imperium was united in silence and awe. And then, as quickly as it had come, the light vanished. When the priests opened their eyes, the throne was unchanged. The Emperor sat as before, unmoving. The tear was gone, but something fundamental had shifted. The Astronomican's flame burned brighter. Warp storms calmed. Worlds long lost to madness flickered back into the Emperor's light. No one could explain it. The ecclesiarchy declared a miracle. The Mechanicus demanded investigation. The Inquisition began purges. But among the common people, whispers spread. They spoke of the redeemed choir, of a song that had reached even the emperor's heart. And far from Terra, in a small settlement built on the bones of the old hive, a young boy stood beneath the crimson sky, humming softly. The others around him joined in. The tune was simple, but it filled the air with something the Imperium had forgotten. Life. The mountains echoed the sound, carrying it far beyond the horizon. In the warp, demons screamed as the melody brushed against their essence. It did not destroy them. It simply reminded them that once, long ago, they too had been born from something other than hate. The Emperor's tear had fallen, and in its fall it had touched all of creation. But the song was not finished. For a time, no one knew how long, the Imperium stood in a breath between chaos and revelation. In the great cathedrals of Terra, the priests chanted louder, their voices trembling not from devotion but from fear. The Inquisition burned more than they blessed, whispering among themselves that something had shifted in the soul of man. Even the Adeptus Astartes felt it, those gene-forged sons who claimed no fear. When they knelt in the silence before battle, the echoes of that song stirred inside them. They did not speak of it. They simply fought harder as though to drown the sound. But the song could not be drowned. It lingered in the wind, in the hum of plasma coils, in the quiet between shellfire. On Cadian ruins rebuilt from dust, the air shimmered faintly when soldiers prayed. In the depths of the black ships, psychers whispered to each other in harmonies they did not understand. And across the void, in places where even the Astronomican's light was dim, derelict machines began to hum again. Old servitors mouthing forgotten hymns, derelict satellites pulsing faint light like heartbeats. Something vast and wordless was awakening, and every soul could feel it, some as hope, others as dread. In the lower hive of Terra, beneath the shadow of ruined spires, Leo lived. He was older now, how long he could not say, for time in the depths had begun to warp, slipping and twisting since the day of the tear. His skin shimmered faintly under the dim glow of the relic fires. The mutations that had once marked him now looked like veins of light, faint and living. Around him, the second choir had grown. There were hundreds now, mutants, workers, discarded soldiers, pilgrims without shrines. They no longer hid. They no longer begged. They sang. Not always aloud, but through the rhythm of their days, the sound of a hammer striking metal, of breath drawn before sleep, of children whispering old words that no book contained. They had built a place of gathering in the hollow of the old basilica where Rael had vanished. Its roof was gone, open to the clouds of ash, and in the center stood nothing but a single stone. No altar, no throne, just a space where the light once burned. The choir came there each day to sing, not in worship but remembrance. One night, as the ash storms quieted and the faint aurora of the Astronomican shimmered across the upper sky, a stranger came. He was tall, wrapped in a cloak of gray that shimmered like woven smoke. His eyes were hidden, but his voice carried the authority of someone long used to command. "You are Leo," he said, stopping a few paces from the gathered choir. Leo nodded slowly. "I am, and you." The stranger hesitated. "Once I was custodian, now I am what remains of one." Murmurs rippled through the group. To see one of the Emperor's golden guardians in the dust of the underhive was unthinkable. The man knelt, his cloak falling open to reveal the faint gleam of gold beneath, corroded, cracked, as though time itself had eaten through it. "I heard it," the custodian said quietly. "The song, we all did, it reached even the throne." Leo met his gaze. "Then you know it's real." The custodian nodded. "Too real. The High Lords are terrified. They call it heresy, a psychic plague. They fear the Emperor has changed." "Or that he remembered," Leo said softly. The custodian looked down at his gauntleted hands. "The Inquisition moves to silence you. They say your choir threatens the balance of faith." Leo smiled faintly. Faith was never balanced. For a moment silence hung between them. Then from somewhere deep below a tremor rolled through the ground. It wasn't the rumble of machines. It was softer, almost musical, like a note struck on a string that ran beneath the world. The choir stirred, voices rising unconsciously in answer. The custodian rose. "What is that?" "It's him," Leo said, his voice distant. "Rael, or what's left of him." The custodian frowned. "He died." "No," Leo said, closing his eyes. "He became the song, and the song isn't done yet." The tremor grew stronger. Ash fell from the broken spires above. Somewhere in the distance, alarms began to sound. The choir's song rose to meet it, unafraid. From the warp something answered. It came not as a roar or firestorm, but as a deep resonance that shook the soul more than the flesh. Every psyker within 1,000 leagues screamed, clutching their heads. Every machine sparked and dimmed. For an instant, the veil between reality and madness thinned to nothing. Through it came visions, impossible and yet clear. The emperor still upon his throne, but his head bowed. The golden tear gone, replaced by light burning behind his closed eyes. His lips moved, but no sound escaped, except to those who had heard the song before. Find the final note. And then the vision shattered. The choir staggered. Leo fell to his knees, gasping. The custodian steadied him, his gold fingers trembling. "What did you see?" "The end," Leo whispered. "And the beginning. The song isn't finished because something's missing." "Then finish it," the custodian said. "I can't," Leo said, shaking his head. "Not alone." The custodian hesitated, then reached into his cloak. From within he drew a fragment of crystal, faintly glowing, humming at the edge of perception. "I found this beneath the throne," he said. "Hidden in the machinery. It called to me." Leo took it reverently. It was warm, alive somehow. He recognized it instantly. "The shard," he breathed, "a piece of the tear." As his fingers closed around it, the ground split. Light surged upward, white and gold and burning with purpose. The choir scattered, shielding their eyes. When the glow faded, Leo stood at its center, the shard hovering above his palm. It pulsed once, twice, then began to sing. Not a human song, not something made by lungs or throat. It was vibration pure, drawn from the marrow of creation. The air rippled. The custodian fell to his knees, whispering prayers he had never believed before. The choir joined in, their voices merging with the sound, weaving themselves into the music. And the world began to change. Machines long dead awoke. Cathedrals cracked and reformed, their stones shifting as if memory had returned to matter. The wind itself carried harmony, reshaping the ash clouds into spirals of light. From orbit, Terra glowed as it had not since the age of technology. The Mechanicus ships circling the planet broke formation, their sensors overloading with impossible readings. But in the warp the reaction was immediate. The light of Terra pierced it, burning through storms and demons alike. Where it passed, nightmares dissolved. And in their place something else began to form, shapes of thought and emotion, not malice but memory, rising like smoke from ancient fires. At the center of it all, in the sanctum of the throne, the emperor stirred once more. His eyes opened, and this time they did not close. The custodians guarding him dropped their halberds and fell to their knees, unable to bear the gaze that turned upon them. The emperor's voice filled the chamber, not in words but in thought that became sound. "You feared to change me," it said, "but I was never still." He rose. The impossible machinery that had bound him for millennia groaned and split apart, its golden bindings shattering like brittle glass. Light poured from the wounds in his armor, spreading outward, filling the palace. Every soul on Terra felt it, an impossible warmth, a sorrow so vast it transcended pain. The emperor looked upward, beyond the ceiling, beyond the clouds, beyond the stars. "I see you, Rael," he said, "and I remember the song." The shard in Leo's hand blazed brighter. He could see Rael now, no longer flesh, but a figure of radiant energy hovering above the basilica ruins, his form dissolving into light. "You finished it," Rael said. "No," Leo whispered, "you did." Rael smiled, a human smile, soft and tired. Then listen. He raised his hands and the song changed. It deepened, expanded, became something vast enough to encompass the stars. Leo joined him, the choir joined, the custodian, even the machines around them. All became part of the harmony. And then came the final note. It began as a whisper and became everything. It was the Emperor's heartbeat, the cry of newborn stars, the first breath of a world remembering itself. It washed across the Imperium through ships, through prayers, through wars. On 1,000 battlefields, soldiers stopped fighting, weapons falling silent as the sound filled the air. Across the warp, demons screamed and then fell silent, undone not by hatred but by recognition. When it faded, there was peace. The light dimmed. The basilica was gone, replaced by a plane of glass that shimmered with gold veins. The choir had vanished. The custodian knelt alone, his armor cracked and smoldering, tears cutting through the grime on his face. Leo stood before him, though he was no longer a child. Light pulsed beneath his skin, calm and steady. "It's done," he said quietly. The custodian looked up. "What happens now?" Leo gazed toward the horizon, where the first true dawn in 10,000 years was rising. "We begin again," he said. Above them in the heavens, the astronomicon burned brighter than it ever had. The Emperor sat upon his throne, not bound, not silent, but watching, eyes open, a faint smile on his face. And in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, where no light had shone in eons, voices began to sing. Not human, not machine, something between. The song of the mutated, the song of the redeemed, the song of what mankind had forgotten and finally remembered again. It would never end, because it had never truly begun.